Working with type in Adobe Illustrator is quite a bit different than working in type in a regular word processing program like Microsoft Word. You have a lot more control. So let's get started with our type tool. You'll click on it here, and before we begin, I just want to show you that there are several options, and we'll show you all of these, but the default type tool is right here. And there's two ways of creating type in your work. You can create what's called point type, where you just click and start typing, almost like setting down an anchor point. Just click, start typing. The other way is to create area type, where you create a bounding box and then type inside that box, and your text would flow within the boundaries or the shape of that box. Before I begin, I want to select all of this text here, just by double-clicking on it, and we'll create both point type and area type. Clicking once, and I'm just going to paste, will create a single line, and it will continue going on and on and on and on and on until you create a paragraph return by hitting your enter or return key. So if I wanted to keep going, hit enter, go on to the next line, etc. And the next line can be as long as I want, enter and return, etc., etc. So you have to manually set the returns for each line while you're working. And if you select that text block with your black arrow, you can actually move the entire sentence, in this case, around just by clicking and dragging. You can reactivate the text so it's live editable type at any time by reselecting your type tool and placing your cursor inside. Now notice that this cursor would be to create a new text sentence, a block or whatever. But if you put your cursor right inside of it, the cursor changes. So you'd want to make sure that the cursor changes, and then you can click and make your edits like so. So that's regular point type. Just click and start typing, or click and paste. The other way is area type. So you'll click and create a box, and then you can start typing, or in this case, I'm going to paste inside the box. Now, for this one, if you want to click and drag the bounding box, you can change how the type flows inside of it, like this. If you scale it like that, you're really just changing the shape of the box. You're not modifying the font size or the font shape. That's very different from point type. If you try to modify the size of it, you're actually going to be skewing the size and the integrity of the letter shapes. Now, if you didn't want to change the integrity of the shapes, but you did want to scale it down from whatever size it was, you could hold down your shift key and then scale, so you'd be scaling it proportionately down a little bit more, like so. You can also place text into your Illustrator file. In this case, let's do an area type box like this. And then we'll just go to the File menu and choose Place. Now, I do have placed text file that you can use for this. And this text import dialog box will come up, and depending on which platform you're on, you can modify any of the settings here. For instance, sometimes if you copy text from like an email program or something, there's carriage returns after every single line, which is totally annoying. And if it was a long email, you'd have to spend time going line by line by line, removing each one. You can turn this option on to zap it for you automatically, or even remove any paragraph breaks. I'm just going to click OK. And that type will be dropped right into my area type box. Let me zoom out a little bit more so that you can see what's going on here. When you have text that overflows the bounds of your box, there's a little button here at the bottom of that bounding area. If you click on that button, you'll notice that your cursor changes, and you could actually create another area type box with the overflow type. So all you would have to do is click and drag to create the next box, and you'll see that there's these invisible lines connecting those two boxes with the overflow type. This is what we call threaded text, and the little boxes are called the ports. So you have your in port and your out port. Now, I didn't have enough room in this box to pick up all the overflow type, so I would have to click here again and create another box. You can create as many of these overflow boxes as you like, and what's more, you can even reposition them anywhere on the artboard, and you'll notice that that thread will update to support the position of the box. You can also change the size of the box at any time. as well as the position. Now, if you wanted to remove a box, just select it and delete, and the overflow text goes back into the original box. I'm going to delete that as well. Now, the other thing that you can do is you can create multiple columns. I'm going to have this text block selected and double-click on my type tool. And here we'll see the rules or the area type options for this box. We can specify the width. So if we knew we needed it to fit in a specific place, let me just turn my preview on. We can modify the size, the dimensions of the box itself, like so. And as we work, the box should update. And then we can specify the number of rows and the number of columns. So I might want to have multiple columns going on here. And perhaps the width needs to be much wider. So let's make it 7.5 by 3.5. You can modify the span as well as the gutter, the space. So maybe I don't need that much to span. And then the gutter is the space between them. So you can minimize the gutter. Again, I think I could probably take the span down a little bit. So I'll just nudge it and take the gutter down a little bit, like so. And then if you wanted to, you can offset the inset spacing. So that's the space inside of the box. And that may be necessary at some times. You might want to have something going on outside the box and want to have a little bit of a margin space. The inset spacing is uniform around the entire container. And you can drop in values there as well. And then there's the first baseline. You can set it to ascent, cap height, leading, X height, M box height, fixed, or legacy, and then set the minimum number. And then you can also control how your type flows within the different rows and columns. When you have everything set up the way you like it, you'll click OK. And now you have created multiple columns with a little bit of inset spacing on your multiple columns. Now, your area type boxes need not be rectangular in shape. When you drag it out, it is rectangular. But because it's a bounding box, means that you can go in with your white arrow and modify the shape. So you could drag it out like this, like so. And this is fantastic, especially if you're going to do some kind of page layout and you need to have your text flow in a particular way. Another thing that you might want to do is spell check, though you should certainly have spell checked before you bring anything in. Sometimes maybe you need to type something in and you just make a typo, but you didn't catch it. Other times you might have written something and wrote the word the twice, but you didn't catch it. So you'll want to spell check. Actually, I wanted to change the shape a little bit more. I want to reactivate that. In fact, let's go here with our Convert Anchor Point tool and we'll make that part curvy so that we can get all the text to flow within that space. So if you want to do spell check, you can either do spell check on the entire document by not having anything selected, or make a selection and the spell check will only check the contents of that object. You can access the spell check through your edit menu, all the way in the middle right here, or do Command or Control I. That brings up the check spelling dialog box. And you'll have to click the start button to begin. But this spell check works like most spell checkers in that it will go through the type within the selected area or the entire document, and it will look for things and make suggestions. So I wrote TXT instead of spelling out the word text because I really mean a TXT file, a file with a .txt extension. So it's prompting me to change that. So for that one, I'd ignore it. Or if I had TXT in several places in my entire document, I would ignore it. Type on a path, it says delete extra word, but I do need that because it's separated with a comma. So I'd ignore. So just going through, it's looking for initial cap, or in this case I did lowercase and uppercase all, so it's suggesting that I change the case for that. I'm going to ignore again. And just keep going through. I'll say ignore all of them. Herm, it doesn't know the name Herm. It's an abbreviation for the name Herman, so it would probably prompt me to change that. Anyway, you go through. If you want to ignore, you can ignore the single instance, ignore all instances, or you can change based on a particular suggestion, one or all instances. If you have a word that's not already in the dictionary, you can add it to your dictionary. And there's additional options here if you want to find repeated words or ignore specific words. You can certainly choose any of those. And when you're done, click the Done button. Another thing that you can do is create type that wraps around objects. So I have a star here, and I'm going to drag it on top of the type here. Actually, let's put it on top, like so. And then with my star selected, I'll go to the Object menu and choose Text Wrap Make. And that will make my type wrap around my object. I don't know if you noticed there was an option for text wrap options, and you can control the offset spacing around your selected shape. So if you need, I'm going to turn that preview on, if you need more space between the wrapped type and your object, you can increase the offset. Another thing you could do is invert the wrap, although in this case I don't think you would need to, but you can invert the wrap. And when you have things the way you like them, just click OK. You could also release it through that Object Text Wrap Release button. Another thing you could do is you can have multiple objects. So one thing I like to do, rather than create an object, add the wrap, create another object, add the wrap, is if I know how much offset that I need on all of them, I'll create one and then drag a copy off the original by holding down the Alt or Option key, and then create a second version that has the same settings. And you can create as many of those as you want. Now look, I've got overflow type happening here, so I can select my text block, and I can modify the shape and size of my type, or my text block rather, to modify it so that everything fits. I can scale it up, scale it down. Everything is totally editable at any time. Let's shift on over now and start talking about the different kinds of things that you can do with the characters. There's a few panels that come with Illustrator that I would recommend that you have open, and you can access them through your window menu. And it's the type area, and all you have to do is click the character and the whole panel pops open. So in the character panel, and you might want to click it a few times so you see the expanded view, you can select the font as well as the font style. You can choose the size as well as the leading, which is the space between the lines of type. That would be from baseline to baseline. You can also scale the shapes of a letter vertically as well as horizontally. You can shift the baseline, so that would be taking the baseline and moving it up or down. You could also rotate individual characters or a block of text. Down here, you can switch type from normal to all caps or small caps. You can, in one click, super or subscript. You can underline, and you can strike through. You can also shift the language to any of the other options in this menu. And you can modify the anti-aliasing. Anti-aliasing is a smoothing that you would want on for all of your projects. And unless you were doing something really specific like dealing with an old 8-bit monitor for the web, you could turn anti-aliasing on. So for instance, this word join, right now it's set to sharp, but if I turned it off, you can see that the outer edges of those letter shapes are really jagged and awful looking. So there's probably no real reason anymore for you to turn anti-aliasing off. In addition to all these basic options, the options menu for the panel allows you to access some of those things through that menu. There's also something called fractional widths and system layout, and depending on which one you choose, that will determine how your type looks. So let me select this text block, and we'll toggle between those. It's set by default to fractional widths, but you can switch to system layout. Just notice that the type changed. It shifted a little bit. Like, check out the space between the Y and the O. Let me switch it back. Fractional widths. Everything's sort of shifting. Now, it's not perfect in this particular font, which happens to be Adobe Caslon Pro. That space there is a little bit too wide. And when you're a professional designer or artist, one of the things that you want to pay attention to is the spacing between your letters. Now, some fonts automatically will make sure that the letter spaces are nice and even, and some fonts you might have to adjust them yourselves. So in this case, we would want to adjust what's called the kerning. That can be done here with this menu, any space between two letter characters. So you could use this menu to increase or decrease the space between two letters, but I find what's easier than doing that, what I find is easier is to put your cursor between the two, then hold down your Alt or Option key, and then use your left arrow to tighten up a space or your right arrow to increase a space. Now, I would not have known that I needed to go all the way to negative 180 if I was using this preset menu. I would not have known that. I would have thought I needed to be in this range down here or up here. So that's why I think it's easier to use your Alt or Option key and the left-right arrows to tighten up a space. Other options in here, you can switch to no break, And that would be ignoring any breaks that had previously been there, and that would just make your text stretch out in a straight line. There may be times once in a while that you would want to do that. And then you can also hide all these options or reset the panel to the way it was before you began. So look, in this first text block, I have regular type, but in the second text block, I'm using some special tools in this panel. So for instance, I've got 7.5. I've changed the regular 1/2 into a half. I've superscripted the ND. And now, depending on which font you have selected, some of those special characters could be part of that font face. So let's switch over to the Open Type panel, and you'll see that there's several options for figures and position. There's also little icons at the bottom, and some of them are available and some of them are not. These are determined by the font itself. So if you go to a font and go, oh, I really want to add contextual alternates, it's just not part of that font. You can't add them. You could also access all of these options in this drop-down menu. So usually what I'll do is I'll make a selection and then go through these and see if they change anything within my selected text block. So you could see it changed my 7.5 to old style versus proportional lining. I'm going to go back to the default figure. And then there's default position. So you could go to superscript or superior, subscript or inferior, numerator, denominator, and you can choose an entire text block or individual characters. So for the word first here, what I've done, and let's just select the word first by double-clicking on the word, I've clicked on this first button, which is for what's called standard ligatures. A ligature is when two or more letters are combined into a single character, and those two characters are actually replaced by a different one. So you can see, if I click on it, in this font, there is the F and the I are connected. So let's turn that off. Actually, let's zoom in a little bit more so we can see this a little bit better. Like so. And grabbing the word first again. Okay, so turning it on, you can see that the F and the I are now connected. It almost looks like a curvy topped H, but it's a single character representing two characters. This option here is what's called discretionary ligatures, and that affects the S and the T. In fact, I think Pinterest's logo uses a discretionary ligature. It's kind of an old-fashioned thing to do, but I think it's making a resurgence in graphic design these days because it's so unusual. It really sets your text apart. And it's also sort of a fancy, flourishy kind of effect. Let's see, we'll do second. We can select the word second or the ND, and we can superscript those. So because we're clicking on this button, we don't have to shrink down the size and raise the baseline. All we have to do is click it once, and it's superscripted and shrunken down all at the same time. Same goes for this. If you have a fraction, but you want to use a nice looking fraction like that, that's actually part of the font, select the numbers and click on this last button here to convert it into fractions. It will shrink the numbers down, superscript 1, make that line nice and even and tight. Everything's kind of cleaned up from the way it was before. So keep in mind that not every font has every single option. So you would want to come into the Open Type panel before you finalize your artwork to see if there's any way you can improve the way that font face looks. That leads me to talk to you about the different types of fonts that you could be working with. And you can actually preview your fonts by clicking on the font type here, and you'll see the font name and then a little preview of how that font looks. If there's an arrow to the side, you can see that there's different font options, font styles. For instance, Arial has narrow, regular, italic, bold, and bold italic. So you'd have to select any one of those to modify them. And there's also different icons next to the different type. There's Open Type and True Type. And the difference between them is True Type is sort of an older font face, and Open Type is the kind of font that would have these special characters, and you'd be able to use those characters in the Open Type panel. So if you're trying to make a modification to a font that is a True Type, you probably not find any Open Type options available to you. So once you have your font selected, you can choose the font style based on the font selection. So in this case, we could choose regular, italic, semi-bold, semi-bold italic, bold, and bold italic. And then you can modify the type size. So you can increase or decrease or type in the number here. And here's where you can adjust the baseline. The default size for the baseline is 120% of the font size. You can increase or decrease that by choosing any of these presets or by typing in a numeric value. So maybe I want it to be exactly 50 and it will just give me more space. Here's where you can adjust the kerning between two characters, or if you wanted to, you can adjust what's called the tracking between all the characters in a selected block. The tracking is evenly adding or removing space between characters. So that's adding tracking or subtracting tracking, so squinching everything up. And this may sometimes be necessary if you need your type to fit within a specified space, or maybe when you're working with type for creating logos, or as sort of a stylistic decision. I wouldn't really do this for like a large block of text because you want your type to be readable, but maybe for a headline, the first time I went to New York, ... something like that, having it scrunch like this could be visually effective. Let's put it back to 0, like so. Let's take the T, just the T. You could increase the vertical height of a letter. You could increase or decrease the width of a letter. So let's make it even narrower, or we'll go much wider. So that's another way that you can change the look of a character, a letter shape. You could also, let me reselect the T. You can also rotate the character. And let's just show you some degrees. So that's 90-degree rotation or 45-degree rotation. Or you can type in a numerical value. So let's do like -12, something like that. Or just +12, like so. So if you wanted to do something funky, letter shapes, you could certainly do that. I wouldn't do it for a whole word or a whole block because it's awkward looking. But again, you might want to use it stylistically for some kind of headline. I'll leave that up to you. Now you could take a text block and modify it all at once by converting it to all caps or to small caps, where initial caps are left initial larger and everything else is shrunken down to slightly smaller capital letters. You could superscript everything or subscript everything. You can add an underline and strike through. So that's the character panel, but let's also take a look at the paragraph panel, and we'll shift down here to do that. Grab this block of text, and with your paragraph panel, you can modify the alignment of the selected text. So by default, for the US anyway, we have left alignment for our type because we read from left to right and top to bottom. You could also center align, although I would highly recommend that you use center align typed very sparingly. I think a lot of new designers go, wow, you can center align it, and they center align everything, and it's just not easy to read and doesn't always look good. So using it sparingly and consciously is a good recommendation. You could also right align your type. You could justify it with the bottom or the last line left aligned, last line center aligned, or last line right aligned, or just justify the heck out of everything, and it's going to add spaces. So whatever it is on that bottom line is going to be stretched out to fit. In addition, you can shift the indent on the left and right sides of your text block. So if we wanted to indent in 10 points from the left, we could do that. We could also do 10 points from the right, something like that. So we're sort of adding inset spacing, but only along the left and or along the right. I'm going to set those guys back to 0. The other thing you could do is first line indent. So here's the first line of a paragraph. So we could indent the first line 10 points so that it's indented, and this line is also indented. There's a paragraph break there. In fact, if you wanted to show the special characters while you're working, those hidden characters, like you could do in a Microsoft Word, you can see the little spaces between each word. You can see the paragraph markers so you know where the end of a paragraph is. So you can toggle those on and off at any time. So in addition to shifting that first line indent, and if you forget which one's which, just hover your cursor over it and it'll remind you. And if you're working with multiple blocks of type within an area type box, you can add uniform spacing either before and or after your paragraph. So in this case, I have 2 paragraphs, so I could add a little bit of space before each paragraph, or let me undo that, after each paragraph, like so. And hyphenation rules are on by default. So if I were to change the size of this line, if I turn hyphenation off, the word moments would fall to the next line. There are some special rules for hyphenation that you can override that are going on here. So you can open that up and make any modifications. And if you turn on your preview option, while you're adjusting the word length before and after length, as well as the hyphen limit, like you could say, I only want to have a maximum of 4 hyphens in this particular text block. You can change any of these options at any time and watch how your text changes based on those changes in here. And when you're ready, click OK. Other options in the paragraph panel's options menu are justification rules. So you can modify these. I probably wouldn't change those, but if you wanted to, you could. There's also single line and every line composer. And depending on how much type you have and where you need to fill your space, you might want to toggle between those because how it fills the space may vary. So I usually toggle those on and off. I'm just going to undo those changes there so I can get my paragraph back to the way it was, because I'd like to show you the difference between regular indents and Roman hanging indents. And let's grab this text block and get rid of that 10. Now, this is regular type where the punctuation is inside with the type, so that punctuation will be left aligned within that area type box, left aligned with any type that falls below it. If you wanted to, you could turn on what are called Roman hanging indents, and this bottom one has it turned on. That can be turned on here in the options menu for your paragraph. And with a Roman hanging indent, your punctuation falls outside of your area type box. And that gives your letters the opportunity to align cleanly along the left. I personally think Roman hanging indents look better, but it may be a tough sell for some of your customers who may be used to seeing text without the Roman hanging indents. So I usually present my work the way I think it should look to a customer, and most times they don't even notice unless you were to give them the option, and then they'd probably choose without. So that's like a little secret. If you like the way this looks, always present your work in the best possible look and feel. And only if somebody points something out like, hey, why is that punctuation outside? And then you can say, hey, that's Roman hanging indents. And it's a more professional looking layout option, but I can show you what it looks like without that turned on. And they may still say they prefer it this way. So be prepared to switch back, but I just want to let you know that that option is there. Now, in addition to your character, your paragraph, and your open type, there's a new option which will allow you to create special paragraph and character styles for your type. And you have to open up those options through your window menu as well, all the way in the type panel, and you'll choose paragraph styles. And that opens up both the character and the paragraph styles. Now, so there's a default character and a default paragraph style, but you can create as many of these as you like. To create a new character style, which you can then use and apply to your text over and over and over again. You create as many of these as you like. You'll start by clicking on this little button here to create the new style, and then you can give your style a name and change its properties by double-clicking on it. This will open up your character style options dialog box, and you can give it a name. So I might call this my heading, or my heading 1. Maybe I want to have heading 1, 2, and 3 and create special styles for each of them. And this is sort of the overview of what's going on for each of the styles. So you'll come into the different categories on the left and make some selections. So for instance, my heading, I may want it to be in Georgia, the Georgia font. And I may want it to be bold and a particular size. So how about 24 point? And I could adjust the leading, the tracking, the kerning, the case. So maybe I want to make sure that it's all caps. And I could go into the advanced character formats. I can adjust the horizontal, vertical scale, baseline, even character rotation, change the language. I can adjust the color. So let's say I want to make all of my heading 1s a particular color from my swatches panel, like this particular purple. And if my font had any special open type features, I could select those here or here. And then when I'm ready, I can click OK. And there's my heading 1. So if I wanted to modify this type to use my heading 1, I would select it. And now notice it took on some of the attributes, but there's a little plus sign here that says it still has some of its attributes. What it really still has is its original font face, which I can see up here. So if I want to make sure that it takes on everything, I just double click it to apply all of the styles from my character style. So the same would go for working with paragraph styles. If you want to create a new paragraph style, click the plus button, double-click to open up the paragraph style dialog box, and go through each of the different categories to set your paragraph style, color, everything you want, and click OK. And then you can select a block of text and apply that paragraph style to it. And when you see that plus sign, just double-click to make sure it takes on all of those attributes. And again, you could create as many of these as you like, and this will really speed up your workflow. You won't even believe how amazing it'll be. So let's switch on over here. I've got one other thing to show you. Sometimes you might create a layout, but you want text to fit within a specified space, but you don't know how much tracking or kerning or leading or whatever else that you might need to do. Well, there's this cool little feature called Fit Headline. And right here, I've created an area type box that's the width that I need my type to be. And I have my font in the size and style that I want it to be, but I need it to fit within this space. In order to do that, you'll have your type selected and you'll go to the type menu and you'll choose Fit Headline. If you see it grayed out, it means that you can't have the entire text box selected. You actually have to put your cursor inside of it for it to work. Now you can choose Fit Headline, et voila. There you go. The type perfectly spaced to fit within the area type box. Let's zoom back out and take a look at this next little piece here, and we'll talk about type on a path as well as area type. If you have a path, let's zoom in a little bit, you can have type on a path by selecting the path first and grabbing your type on a path tool. And it's this third one down here. Notice how your cursor changes. It looks like a regular cursor with what I always call a surfboard. It looks like a little surfboard. So if you wanted to add type on a path, you would have to select the path first, grab this tool, and then click on the path and paste. Now, I didn't grab any type beforehand. So before I do that, I'm going to copy all of this type here so I have it loaded on my clipboard, and then I can come back here and paste with that type. So grabbing my type on a path tool, I will click once and paste, and my type flows along the path. Now, you don't have to stick with what it gives you. You can actually adjust how your type flows on the path by using your white arrow, your direct selection tool. When that tool is selected, you'll notice that there's this little tall line here. That line will actually control how your type flows on the path. So by clicking and dragging that line, I'm actually adjusting where the starting point is over on the right side. So if I want my type to begin at the very beginning of this path, just shift that guy right there, and then my type will flow along the path. Now you'll notice that there's overflow text here. So I can adjust that marker to go to the end of my path, and my type should continue flowing till it gets to the end like so. These little markers can be adjusted at any time, in and out, and that midpoint marker can also be adjusted at any time, in and out. Now, if you have overflow type and it's just not fitting on your path, you'll probably need to either adjust the size of your font or adjust the length of your path. This feature also works on vertical type on a path. So there is a vertical type on a path tool, but you have to make sure you choose that option before you click on it. So I'm going to click at the top here and paste. And notice the orientation of my letters. It's letter on top of letter reading downwards. So this is something you might want to use sparingly unless you're working with like Japanese characters, for instance. You can also put type inside of a shape. So I'm going to select this shape. Actually, let's talk about type on a path too. You could actually put type on a closed shape. So you have your shape here. I'm just going to click and paste again. But notice what happened. I completely lost my original shape. So I'm going to undo that. If you needed to keep the shape and have text flow around it, what you would do is copy that shape, paste it right on top with the Command or Control F key. So now I have my original green circle and then the other green circle right on top of it. Now I'm going to reselect all this copy and copy it onto my clipboard. Now selecting that top shape, and I can go back to my type on a path tool, clicking anywhere and pasting. So now I've pasted my path on one of the shapes, but my original shape is there behind everything. Once you have your type on a path like that, if you wanted to offset it from the shape, you could hold down your Shift and Alt key, Alt or Option key, to drag it away from the shape. So now you have a nice even boundary around the outside. Same goes for type on an angular path. You can grab that type on a path tool, clicking anywhere and pasting. And again, if you would want to have that original shape beforehand, just copy paste on top or behind. And then when you click on the path, you'll still see your shape behind it. So here's the vertical type, vertical area type, and vertical type on a path. So if you want to do curvy, vertical, you could do that here. Either way, either font, either tool, so that you can show the orientation of your type this way. Another thing you could actually do is you can work with area type, which would be to put your type inside of an object. And you can do that with any object with regular left to right reading type or vertical type. So let's do the area type tool first. We have an object, so let's select our object tool and then choose the area type object. And then notice my cursor. It looks like a little circle, and what it means is your type is going to fall inside of the selected object. So clicking here and then pasting, my type flows around the inside of that object. Similarly, if we choose this shape here, and then we grab the vertical area type tool and click inside of it and paste, our type is going to flow inside from top to bottom and right to left, but we're inside of that shape. Let's swing on over here and talk about converting your type to outlines. Sometimes when you're working, you may need to convert your letter shapes to outlines, and that would mean that your type would no longer be editable text. It would become an actual shape, just like a star or a circle or a square. So I have my type here. It's editable text. As long as it's editable, I can change anything about it, its color, its font size, anything. But if I need to modify the actual letter shapes, I need to convert my editable type into outlines. And you can do that easily through the type menu by choosing Create Outlines. Now we have individual letter shapes, and they're automatically grouped. So if you want to, you can either ungroup them by right-clicking and choosing Ungroup, or you could just continue working with them within a group by selecting each one with your white arrow. Now, if you wanted to modify the properties, like the color, say, click inside of the shape, and then you can go grab a different color. If you wanted to modify the shape itself, you'd want to click on one of the anchor points so that you could modify that anchor point. You can select multiple anchor points and manipulate them by clicking and shift-clicking. You could grab as many of them as you want. You can even deselect by shift-clicking a selected one. So if I wanted to do something like that, I could grab this guy and move it in and up, like so. Then I can grab these two, say, and move those upwards and change the color on that one. So you get the general idea. You can play around with each of the individual letter shapes to your heart's content. Now, another thing that you can do is work with the envelope distort tools, and there's three that I want to show you. There's the warp, the mesh, and the top object. So right here, I have some editable text, and we go into the object menu. There's an option here called envelope distort. Let's work with the first one, make with warp. Turn your preview on, and you can choose from all of these different styles. So there's arc, upper and lower, arch, bulge, shell, upper and lower, flag, wave, fish, rise, etc. So you can choose any of these and then modify how much they are changing the original shape on the horizontal and the vertical scale. When you have it the way you like it, click OK. And in fact, now you have anchor points. You could further go in with your white arrow and modify any of those anchor points. Let's select this text and we'll do the next one. Object envelope distort, make with mesh. Turn on your preview. Now this time, the mesh will give you as many rows and columns as you like, so they don't have to be uniform. Actually, let's do a few so that we can really see what's happening with this. And then click OK. Now, going in with your white arrow, you can manipulate any of those anchor points. You can even drag any of those paths. There's your direction handle, so you can squiggle on any of those at any time. With the white arrow, you would select the entire text block. So you'd have to definitely choose your black arrow and usually deselect first and then go and select the individual paths that you would want to modify and or the anchor points. You can select multiple anchor points by holding down the Shift key as you select them. And just play around until you get the shape the way you want it. Now the third option under Envelope Distort will allow you to warp things based on a shape. And I always think it looks coolest when you're working with a circular object. So I have the word happiness 3 times behind the purple circle, and I have some stripes behind the black circle. We'll do the same technique, but you get kind of 2 cool different looks. So you need to select all of your objects, and I just use my black arrow to drag a marquee around all of them, and then go to the Object menu, Envelope Distort, Make with Top Object. And check how the text is sort of flowing. It's like curving and wrapping and warping around my top object. So let me show you how to do this one and then we'll be done. Grabbing all of the objects, Object, Envelope Distort, Make with Top Object. Cool.